Thank you so much. And now I have the privilege of introducing you to Vicki Stinson, who is the wife of the pastor of the First Nazarene in St. Helens. But I met her at our big community Good Friday service, and I asked her a couple of. April introduced me, and I was like, "Oh, I found out that she's an expert working with what do we neurodivergent kids." Okay. I'm thinking of special needs or SPED, or we have a number of kids that are a little more difficult. And right there in the lobby of the high school after the Good Friday service, I started asking her questions, and she started giving me tips, and I was like in heaven. It was like, this is a gold mine, man. And so we got to have her come and share. So she's going to come and share she's got lots and lots of trainings. So she's going to share a little of that with us and then open it up for some questions. So as you're thinking and as you were processing what Autumn was sharing with her littles that she works with in the preschool department, we have teachers here that you have the older kids. And so we've got the whole range. So think of your questions so we can just pull all that info out of her head like I did in the lobby. Come on up, Vicki. We are glad you're here. Thanks for sharing. This is part of the community thing that we're growing here in Scappoose, that experts that serve God in another place are reaching out to us, and I hope we're reaching out to help others with their VBS and to staff it. And this is just a neat thing God's doing here, and it's pretty unusual.
It's awesome. So Autumn, thank you. You already touched on some things that are important regardless of the age.
You gotta get yourself.
I'm not going to be comfortable with that.
But we're recording it so that look at all the teachers who didn't make it.
Okay, I'll do my best. I like to move around, but I'll do my best.
Yeah.
First of all, again, thank you, Autumn. You touched on a few things like motivation and, thank you so much. That helps a lot. Thanks. Motivation and consistency, which are important regardless of the students that children that we're dealing with. So thank you for that. We can kind of think of, if you remember what she said about Maslow and that psychological basis is our base. We need to feel comfortable and safe. Our kids with special needs are often stuck in that space. So they aren't getting to the self-actualization at this point. We're needing to help support them to build skills and tools to be able to do that. So they're stuck in id as well. So those 3 levels of our brain where we're getting our needs met, that's where this population is. That doesn't mean that they can't grow, and it doesn't mean that they can't make changes and develop and mature. It just means that their brains are, as you said, neurodivergent, and my daughter likes to call them neurospicy. So we've discovered our whole family is neurospicy, thanks to me, apparently. I have ADHD, and I've given it to everyone. So I passed it on to all of my children. They're welcome. As she said, I've been an educator most of my adult life, whether it was teaching preschool, in child development centers, or I moved into the public school system where I was an IA for a paraprofessional for students that needed that level of support in the classroom. I also, then at 36, decided that I can do this. I can do her job. And so I went back to school. And boy, was that a rude awakening, first of all. I still owe that woman an apology because I was horrible. I remember thinking, This is not that difficult. I can do this. I have 3 grown kids who all live over the hill, so I'm blessed to have them all nearby. I have 2 newish. Actually, I have 3 grandsons that are all 2 and under. One of the grandpa's with one right now. And I was going to bring the other one, and we were going to have this wonderful play date today because it's 2 sides of the family, so they haven't met each other. And the little guy over the hill has hand, foot, mouth. So that didn't happen. My grandma heart is super broken, and I just have to look forward to other opportunities that might be able to happen. Again, I'm married to Greg Stinson. He is the pastor of the Nazarene Church in St. Helens. That's a whole story in and of itself. We're getting ready to celebrate our 2nd anniversary. So first of all, I have to say the Holy Spirit laid something on my heart first thing this morning when I woke up, which is pretty cool because I've had food poisoning the last 3 days. So the fact that I was open to hearing anything from anyone was good. So there's a little girl that she didn't grow up in church, and she would go to church. If she stayed overnight with a friend, she would go to church with them. She would catch the church bus, to go to a local church. Or even up through college, if somebody was going to church, it didn't matter to me whether they were going to, I just gave it away, but it didn't matter to me whether I was going to a Catholic church or a Baptist church or a Methodist church. I just went with whoever it was that was going and whoever had invited me. So even though that little girl grew up to be me, I don't remember having a Holy Spirit moment like as a child or even into my young adulthood. I do remember a few girls like praying with me one time on the steps of this little country church. I don't even remember why I was there or who I was with. So what I want you to understand is that the important thing is that you're planting seeds. I wouldn't be here, and I wouldn't be me, if not for probably hundreds of people who planted seeds in me. And you may not be the person who tends the seed, who waters the seed, who watches it grow. But know that the seed had to be planted in the first place. So that was from God. Love you. Be joyful. Be kind. Show God's love wherever you can, right? So I've been asked to speak, and it's primarily around students who, the neurodivergent part of students that is, they classify as autism spectrum disorder. It's a spectrum because you have students who literally cannot care for themselves at all. They can't have any self-care at all and nonverbal. To students who, we all grew up in high school with a kid that was a little bit weird. We kind of thought they were a little bit quirky. And I remember having a student in high school, he wore camos. And he kind of pretended that he was in battle, like all the time. But he also was, he's in our classes, he was participating, paying attention. But he was a little odd, and I would guess now, with the experience that I have, he was probably on that spectrum somewhere. So, I know that you guys have a wonderful blessing in that you have lots of kids coming from the community. And that means you have a wonderful opportunity to just love on these kids. So the kids that I generally work with, I've worked with children on every level of that spectrum. Whether or not they get their personal needs met or whether they're just learning to adapt to a variety, an endless variety, I think, of scenarios that can be confusing or frustrating. So we can never assume that they're aware of social cues. Like, for example, this young man in high school clearly wasn't aware or did not care that he looked odd and that we in fact weren't in battle. He did not need to wear camouflage clothes to school every day, but that was his lane that he drove in. So an example of this social cue, I've taught before just an example of social cues. So when, for example, when you go to the bathroom, all of us do, in a public place. So women typically don't have much of a choice. We just go in a stall and do whatever, right? But we can go with lots of people, and that's like a potty party, and it's okay. Boys don't do that. That's weird, right? And if you go into a men's room, a young boy who doesn't read social cues, and there are 3 urinals and somebody's at one on the end, he may very well go to the one in the middle and stand right next to you. Now, the person who's using the one on the end is like, okay, that's a little weird. Like, you could have been over there, and we wouldn't be so close together. Those are those social cues they don't understand. Okay, they're not going to understand that that's just a little bit odd, and that we have these unwritten rules. For example, if I go into the stall, it's because I'm going to need the stall, right, if I'm a guy. But that doesn't necessarily mean the same thing to somebody that doesn't read those social cues. So that's just an example. There are also, in addition to the social awareness challenges, there are likely sensory issues and communication difficulties. They also can have really restrictive or rigid behavior around preferred, non-preferred things. For example, the young man that liked to be dressed in the army. And we'll talk about how to use this to our advantage later. In the case of Sunday school, imagine being in a place that's loud and busy, and maybe one Sunday is unlike another. Different kids, different activities, maybe even different leaders. So feeling overwhelmed and not able to really communicate that. So I'm going to be touching on each of these things, just the communication and the behavior, as well as expectations. The most important thing you'll hear today, besides the planting seed part, which wasn't in this before, it wasn't here until this morning, so, is that behavior's communication. That's it. Behavior's communication. So we do the same thing if we're bored, if we're hangry, if we're tired. We have certain behaviors. We also have the ability to verbally communicate, for the most part, what we're feeling with someone. Imagine that you're not able to identify exactly how you feel or be able to talk about it. So for me, the key for me, and it's a gift truly, because otherwise I don't know how I could do it, is to show compassion. It's always trying to imagine myself in that situation. How would I feel if I were overwhelmed, scared, uneasy, unsure, confused, and I couldn't fix that for myself? And I couldn't explain to somebody, hey, I'm really confused. Can you clarify that for me? So I feel things really deeply, and this absolutely helps me in my work. I also know that God calls us to be compassionate in Scripture. So Ephesians 4:32, be kind and compassionate to one another, forgiving each other just as Christ forgave you. We can find others throughout the Bible in 1 Peter and Colossians. Compassion is an extension of the love that God calls us to demonstrate to each other. And in this setting, compassion comes from trying to imagine what it must be like to not be able to get your needs met, whatever that means. So behavior that works for a student but is not appropriate for the situation or the setting is maladaptive, meaning it works for them, but it doesn't really work for the rest of us. Like maybe we're talking about at the lower end of that, the student that wants to stand up and listen. In this case, it's not a very significant behavior, but recognizing that there was communication behind that behavior, they just can't sit down. That's just, at this moment, that's not what they can do. So when we have maladaptive or inappropriate behaviors that are disruptive, in this case it was not, we have to either extinguish it, like get rid of it, or we have to replace it with something else. Because, and usually that's what you do first, quite frankly, is you replace it. So an increase in that maladaptive behavior generally indicates there's some kind of stress that they're experiencing that leads to their being unregulated or dysregulated. And that exactly is the inability to maintain that safe or appropriate behavior. So any number of things can affect a person's ability to regulate. And this goes for me too. You know, if I'm tired, if I'm hungry, I will act differently than if I am happy, well-fed, and well-rested. So for these guys, it could be a lack of sleep, it could be an illness, it could be something that's happening in their home prior to them coming. It could be something pervasive that's happening, like their family's going through some kind of transition that they're kind of thinking about. Or it could even be something as simple as that crazy Sunday morning rush, right, that we've all experienced, where you're just trying to get out of the house on Sunday morning and you have any number of kids to get ready as well, and you're trying to not be the people that walk in after the service has started. So even that feeling of being rushed, you can leave us feeling a little dysregulated. I know that nobody can relate to that, right? Nobody relates to that. So the first thing we try to do is prevent that kind of situation. So as much as we can control an environment to create a situation in which a student's behavior they're able to maintain their behavior. So we do that by creating structures and communicating very clear expectations. So I'm going to talk about each of these a little bit, and you can be thinking about how you can make these adjustments to do Sunday school differently, or just add some structures that may not already be there. I saw some great structure when I was here. She had taken my words to heart, and she'd put up like a dry erase board where she'd outlined the different activities for the day and put like a little picture next to each one. Awesome, great idea. I brought something for you. It's a pocket chart. The only problematic thing with a dry erase board is you can't fix it. You know, once it's there, or if you add something or take something away, it messes up the whole thing. So this is a way you can turn things around and you do something different if you need to change up the thing. So consistency for structure is the most important thing. And I would imagine that in this particular setting, that would be a unique challenge. You have people volunteering in different capacities. You have you have substitutes that are being made for personal scheduling conflicts, and that makes the following even more important. It'll be critical to have the same schedule as much as possible of activities each time. So if you need to deviate from the usual plan, just let them know ahead of time, like today's going to be different, and then point out where it's different today, so that they can know what to expect. That's one of the key phrases we use in education is expected, unexpected. So if something happens that they're not planning on, for example, it could be even the disruption of another student, that's unexpected, and so then that might be enough to kind of throw them off a little bit. So there's tools that can be helpful for creating structures, and I'll talk even more about tools and such in a little bit. But one thing I took note of that I said that you created this great signage. And so I want you to be able to be a little more flexible with that, so that, first of all, we can't all necessarily draw. And so I have this for you to be able to do that a little bit. I'll give it to Vicki after I speak. And things like this are easily purchased, like on Amazon and such. I had planned to bring multiple visual supports. I had food poisoning, and I've been sick for the last few days, so that didn't happen. I was lucky to get this off my work computer onto my home computer so that I could print it off. As far as expectations go, you just want to limit these to a few really important key ideas. All students, for example, that are already attending school have something like this in school. So like be safe, be respectful, be responsible, or any variation thereof. And that pretty much, those key phrases kind of encompass everything. You know, if I'm being safe, I'm not climbing on furniture, or I'm not throwing things. If I'm being respectful, then I'm talking or asking for something. If I'm being responsible, then that means I'm responsible for my own body and for what I do. So that can be helpful to think of those key things like that. You can even have the kids be a part of that, creating those expectations. Most of them will be able to do that again because they've been in school and they have it kind of pounded into them at school. The important thing is to revisit these frequently, use the same language each time, so that kids can learn what that expectation is. Making sure it's equitable so that the rules apply to everyone. This is where you can make those adjustments for, like, example, for safety. Like, maybe everybody does sit on the circle, but this person can go and, like, pace in the back of the room. There's nothing unsafe or disrespectful or irresponsible about doing that. So these are the key things that just everybody has to follow. And I've actually had, you can have good luck with just even, I noticed this in this class too, somebody was back playing with the Legos. Another student drifted away from the group to go play with them as well. And the assistant person just interceded and just said, it's okay, you need to go back to the group, and they did. Because a neurotypical kid knows what your expectations are, and they're going to follow those. Communication. So there's a hierarchy in communication. This hierarchy and timing are key to supporting people with the neurodiversity. You'll recognize these communication styles and have probably used them with other children or even other adults. We've all given the side eye to our spouse, or, you know, or the look to our child, you know, in a certain situation. Again, those are subtle clues that may not be necessarily read by a kid on the spectrum. But they can become overwhelmed by any number of factors. So the ability to maintain depends on our ability for them to hear what they're communicating and for us to respond appropriately. So we talked a little bit about this before: noise, light, objects, people, even verbal communication, especially too much of it, can be problematic. So also using ambiguous phrasing to introduce the activities. For example, we're going to play a game. If I'm neurotypical, I'm just going to wait to hear what the game is and what the rules are, and, you know, and join in. It's not going to be a big deal. A student that, or child that is neurodivergent might immediately create some anxiety for them. Well, what kind of game is it? Is it like a team game? Is it an individual game? Am I going to have to talk to somebody? Am I have to remember stuff? Am I going to have, is it competitive? You know, all kinds of things are already happening. You're explaining the game and they've completely checked out. And so then when you're getting ready to play the game, they're clearly not able to do so, because not only do they don't understand, they didn't hear what you said because they were in their own mind, but they're not able to follow what you're doing. So in those cases, it's really important that that assistant person or whoever be able to break things down in little steps. So for example, pulling that student aside and saying, we're playing, you know, this game. Your job will be to do this. And then we're going to do this. And then, so the first then is key language, as I use it daily, multiple times a day. First you'll do this, then you'll do this. And if they insist on doing this, I just there's no response in my face. It's just first this, then this, and I wait. So breaking those things down into smaller parts so that we call it scaffolding when we kind of build up to what the expectation is, that can be helpful. When they are in that place where they're spiraling or creating some anxiety or something else, they can't hear you. Literally, they can't hear you. So that's where the visual supports come in. because of that hierarchy, the gesture or the body language and then the visual supports come in, then it's important to know that you might need to back up. So if they're not hearing you verbally, one of two things. One, shorten what you're saying, so make it as direct and clear as possible, while waiting for a response. That's the other piece that we often don't wait long enough. We give a direction. Most neurotypical kids can process that quickly and start the activity. A child that's not processing that quickly might need some time. And I can tell you, I've literally made myself stop and count like to 15 seconds. Because if you repeat what you said, you have to start all over. And that's even more painful than waiting the first 15 seconds. So it's hard. It's really hard. And I catch myself saying too much sometimes to kids, and then I'll just be like, bring it back, bring it back, bring it down to like 3 to 5 words minimum. So when we see dysregulation happening, we want to help that person get back to what we call their baseline as quickly as possible. And then, again, during that time, they're going to be impacted by whether or not they can process verbal commands. And so it's important to choose what type of communication you use. Like I said, I generally start with verbal redirection, like I need this. And then ideally, if I have a picture or some object in my hand that represents what I want them to do, that would be the next piece. That's a visual support. So I might have, a game, the thing we're using for the game or something in my hand so that they have something to focus on, to connect to while they're not able to hear me. Again, I'm bringing up the timing thing again. It's really important that you do allow them time to process. I think for us, again, it's not instinctual for us. It's not intuitive for us to do that. So a lot of these things are things you'll have to really think about, and know that you have to practice them. You're not going to be successful the first even 5 times you try this. But the important thing is to do it the same way each time. You can fail all 5 times, but the 6th time that you do it exactly the way you did the other 5, you'll have success, because they will know what to expect. This is always the expectation. This is what it sounds like. This is what it looks like. So where another neurodivergent student might need 100 repetitions, whereas a typical student might only need 1 or 2 reminders to be able to participate. Sometimes we go to a gesture. For example, if I have a student in dysregulation, I might just point. Because I have a student that it's like, well, your choices are either to be at your desk or go to the break room. Those are your choices. Desk, break room. And that's it. That's all I say. I just wait. And if I wait a few seconds and they're not looking like they're making a choice, I might repeat that. But again, it's more the movement of my finger, because that's what I want them focusing on. I might tap on their desk or the table if I want to get their attention, rather than interrupt the entire class to verbally make a redirection. The most important thing with communication, I think, too, is that you have to make sure you have their attention, right? So, and that can be hard, especially with kids that are neurodivergent. You may not be able to tell whether they're paying attention. One of the things, if it's really important, I'll say, look at me, because that's really hard to do. It means they're going to have to hyper-focus for just a minute. And most will comply. And then you very quickly and easily, as directly as possible, tell them what it is that you want from them. So making sure you gain their attention, those visuals, those gestures, the language first, then. We do this a lot when it's preferred activities, which I'll talk a little bit about too. I have a little boy that gets his iPad after he eats his lunch. And he'll automatically start tapping on the closet. where his iPad is. And I usually direct him to use his talker or his words because I want him to use that functionally. And he'll say, YouTube, watch YouTube. And I said, oh, yes, you absolutely can watch YouTube as soon as you eat your lunch. And if that doesn't, then it goes, I bring it down to that direct language. First lunch, then iPad, and I just walk away. This student I know can hear me fine, and he's just testing. But again, it's been the same rule all year long. So one of the baffling things is we have kids who can navigate an iPad better than I can, right? But they can't remember, or it's not that they can't, but they don't remember that they get their iPad at the same time every day. Like I eat lunch, then I get my iPad. I think more than that, it's just that reassurance that they know what to expect. So he's trying to, check, like, is this still the rule? Yep, that's still the rule. It's been like that since September, so I'm not changing it now. And that's one of the things too. It's like kids have some of these crazy abilities. I have a student who can read the room with at least 5 different adults and find the most opportunistic time to go out the door. The good news about that is because he has autism, he goes to the same place every time because that's where he wants to go. Now, it's catching him before he gets there because it's around the corner, a staircase up to the upper gym. And if he makes it across the gym to the outside door, he could be outside. Where he learned this, I have no idea. I have no idea how he figured this out. So it's a matter of the adults being fast enough to catch this little guy before he crosses the gym. And fortunately, the gym teachers that are up there know and kind of like, whoa, they block the road for us. But he can do that, but he cannot walk to the lunchroom or get off the bus and walk to class by himself. He is unable to do that. He does not have the skills. So that's where this it's just this fascinating part of our brain, how our brains function. It blows me away every day, and it's super, super interesting when you start thinking about the psychology and how our brains function and how they develop. So that's just an example of sometimes you see this ability to do something that doesn't match what the ability of their normal expectations or what they do on the daily. Try to avoid sarcasm or figurative language. They don't get it. They don't understand. It will be confusing to them because they're very literal. And I can't think of an example off the top of my head, but I'm sure you've been there where you're like, I need you to whatever, like a whatever, and they will do that. Or even exaggerating. The one place I would say exaggeration's okay is when you're celebrating. I have a guy that comes, his attendance was terrible. And we throw a party on the sidewalk every day when we see him on the bus before he gets off. It's like, yeah, oh, hi, we're so happy. Throw a party. When you're trying to catch a kid doing the right thing at the right time, do it. Throw a party. It's okay. It just is so important to catch those things that they're doing correctly. My ex-father-in-law had a saying, and this was a long time ago, when I was first doing early childhood and behavior modification, so 30 plus years ago. He said, he says it takes 10 atta-girls to make up for one aw shucks. And I thought, he's right. Like it takes that party, that reinforcing the good thing, like 10 times to make up for the one time that you weren't your best self in communicating with a child, right? So that's something that literally has stuck with me for all of these years because it completely feeds into child development and to behavior modification. It takes 10 attagirls to make up for one aw shucks. So there's another carrot you can take with you today. Autumn talked a little bit about choices. When you're dealing with kids that are neurodivergent, absolutely present choices whenever possible. The one thing I would caution you is don't ask a question if it's not a choice. So, are you ready to sit down? If it's not a choice, then, and they say no, then what, you have to have an alternative, right? So, said that backwards. Don't ask a question unless it is a choice. So if it's something like we're lining up to go to lunch. Are you ready to line up? That's not a choice. Are you ready to line up? That's not a choice. We're going to lunch. Line up so we can go to lunch. So anytime that you can think about that, I've done it. I've asked them something and they'll say no, and then I'm like, okay, now what? Because they had to do that thing, whatever it was, and now I'm stuck making something up, at least temporarily. Sometimes you can intentionally pair some students together. Somebody that like maybe even goes to school with the student, is familiar with the student, knows what they like, knows what they don't like. That's intentional pairing, and so you can make that happen in your classrooms if possible. The other thing is to reframe anything negative into something positive, kind of along the same lines of don't ask a question unless it's a choice. So I might be inclined to say, get off the couch, or we don't climb on the couch. What you want to do is use something that they can't do both at the same time. So if I'm saying, we don't climb on the couch at church, I would say instead, I'm like, oh, so-and-so, I need your feet on the floor. Because they can't do what I'm asking them to do without getting off the couch. So I'm not exactly telling them, but I know I'm going to get the result I want. No running. We just say walking, please. If somebody's over talking, it's just like, oh, I need voices off. Listening. So you're redirecting them, but in a positive way. And again, all of these things take practice. So I feel like today I'm doing the same. I'm planting seeds, It's like you'll be curious, you'll be thinking about some of this, and you may investigate further. And if you get a couple of things, little nuggets from what I've said that help your practice, then my job is well done. Examples of extinguishing or replacing behavior. I have one little guy who'll just walk out the door when he gets mad. He just leaves. Obviously problematic, and he's not necessarily fast, but he's determined, and he's a big guy. So I had to think of something, and it took me a while. I had to think of something that would work, because his behavior was maladaptive, right? It's working for him. He's getting out of the classroom, which is what he wants. But it's not working for me, because then at least one staff or two staff have to peel off and go after him, and it's not safe because he will go outside, he'll start walking down the street. He has done that. So what I ended up doing, part of the reason he was walking out of the classroom is because he was mad that it wasn't art time yet. That's important because art time comes right before we go home. So he's done. Basically, when he walks out of the room, you have said there's not art or art's in whatever. He's not hearing you. He's done. I'm done. I'm going home, and I'm leaving. And he does. So two things. One, I put a very involved checklist into place that has visual supports of his day, all the way up to art class. And so he's in charge of this checklist. And he has to check off each activity we do during the day. And I will say, it takes weeks of being consistent with this for him to understand that art's way over here. Like, I have to do all of these other things before I get to art class, which I don't really think he wants art class. He just wants to go home. I think that's the bottom line. So first we put the checklist into place. Well, then it was still problematic because he would like point to the place on the sheet where art was going to happen and be insistent that it happen now. And again, he can't hear me. He's already getting escalated because he knows that's a long ways away. He doesn't want to wait. So the other thing I did after finding out the checklist was working but not completely effective, I started, the next time he starts to walk out the door, I said, stop. And he did. And I said, do you want to go for a walk? Walk. Yes. Okay. Who do you want to go with you? Do you want teacher Maisie to go with you, or you want teacher Sean to go with you? And he'll choose. And they go. So I've eliminated the concerning behavior as far as leaving the building, because now he just gets to go for a walk. The difference is he's not going alone, and he's going with an adult, and he's safe. And that has been hugely beneficial. It's changed everything. And of course, at first every time he'd like escalate a little bit, we'd offer the walk. And so he went for like 5 or 6 walks a day at first. Now, maybe once or twice a day, he'll start to get kind of agitated, and he'll go walk. Oh, thank you for letting me know that you want to go for a walk. Do you want to go with teacher Heather, or do you? So because I'm looking to see who's available to go out in the hall and take you for a walk. So that's just another example of kind of that. Now that's not a problem. He's not running out of the classroom anymore. I've completely extinguished that behavior. I've replaced it with something else that's more functional. Don't we all need to take a break sometimes? Like, I'm just going to go for a walk. I'll be right back. I know I do that during the day. I'll tell my staff, I'm just going to go for a walk. And I loop the building a couple times. I have a student who, this is just another example of replacing a behavior. He obsesses on the communication devices. So they all have, not all, but a lot of the kids have devices that have a particular program on them that allow them picture, visuals to choose to be able to speak and get their communication across. And he thinks it's really fun to play with them. And he has one. But he was going for other people's, like all over the room. Very disruptive. And he's a big guy, and he will not give it back to you once he has it. We have to like corner him and like, get it away. So, and I'm frustrated. So sometimes it comes out of frustration because I'm like, I can't teach when I have this kid just taking everybody's communication devices all day. And so what I did is I said to him, words. You want your words? And he says, yes. I'm like, okay, take your words in the break room. Because what he wants is he wants to type in a whole bunch of stuff and have it go, and he thinks that's hysterical. Where it's like, goldfish, cheese cheddar, and they all reel off all, hundreds of things at once. That's what he wants. He wants that stimulation and he thinks it's super funny. Drives me crazy. Plus he's getting up and taking other kids' communication devices. So I'm like, fine, you can have your words, but you have to take them in the break room. Took a couple days of redirecting him into the break room. Here, go ahead. Now he will ask. Break room. Okay, do you want your words? Yes. Okay, great. Take your words into the break room. And he's literally in there punching pictures that verbalize different words and just having a party all by himself. And we let him do that for 5 to 10 minutes, and then we ask him to rejoin us. And that's become effective. It's not ideal because he's still not using the iPad functionally. Well, I guess it's functional for him. He's not using it to really communicate. But it's definitely a step in the right direction. because he's not taking everyone else's. So sometimes you're not going to get there all in 1 or 2 steps. It's going to take a series of steps. And that just brings me to that restrictive behavior, where they're very rigid or restrictive in what they do, and that's generally because it's a preferred activity. So in this guy's situation, the preferred activity was to let the communication device just rattle off word after word after word. And he's motivated by that because he wants that. The kid that wants to go up in the gym, the kid that wants to leave the room, you find out what motivates them. And it's different for each kid, and sometimes it's hard, and sometimes it's an M&M. I'm telling you, sometimes that's what it is. I have one little boy who doesn't speak, doesn't communicate, rarely participates, but he will, on his communication device, hit cheese balls. Cheese balls. So you hear it randomly throughout the day, or you hear cheese balls. But he's communicating. And he only started doing that like 6 weeks ago because I bought cheese balls at the Costco, which I now have to buy lots of cheese balls at the Costco. But he's hugely motivated by them for whatever reason. So it's finding the thing that just makes that kid click. Sometimes it's space. Sometimes it's a particular item or a particular show, like a particular TV show, or a classification of items, like those plushmallows, squishmallows. It's something. There's something that motivates him. And if you can't figure it out, it's okay to ask. Like, what is your kid like? They're going to tell you because they're going to know because they've lived with this child. So they can say, oh, he's really motivated by blank. So however you can use that, and yes, manipulate that to your benefit is awesome. So I can actually use the things that I find, like cheese ball. Oh, okay, look, Jesse, first folder, then cheese ball. Cheese ball. Okay, folder, first folder, then cheese ball. And I walk away and leave the folder. This child's working because he wants a cheese ball. I can't think of anything as that motivating for me that I would be willing to do just about anything for a single cheese ball, but it works. Sometimes it's something completely random, but it works. This one little guy, it's the iPad he gets after lunch. He will do anything for that iPad, anything that you ask him to do, he will do it, as long as he knows he gets his own personal iPad afterwards. So the good news about all of that behavioral stuff is you can use it to your advantage once you figure out like what makes that kiddo tick.